I've recommended to you The Comfort Crisis.
Yes.
And the subtitle of the book is To Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self. And maybe this concept of time, to the point I don't have time, he says code for priority, but it's also maybe we don't want to feel uncomfortable. And so we just going to do what we want to do right now, even at the cost and expense of what could potentially be an even bigger and better, brighter future.
Yeah, taking the easy way out, avoiding the conflict, avoiding the avoiding being uncomfortable. Um, this is a hard one. I think for a lot of people to understand and then make adjustments in their life, it's hard to see it until you kind of make it through that like first grind and you start to see a little bit of the results.
Mm.
And then you're motivated a little bit more to know that, things take time. Play the long game. It's having that, I guess, faith and that trust that your future is going to be better, brighter,
Mm.
if you put in the work and the uncomfortable. I mean, being uncomfortable, I've had to get really used to this. Being uncomfortable is a part of life. It's a part of change. Change of any type, good or bad,
Yeah.
is going to be uncomfortable naturally. And that physically, your body
Mm-hmm.
responds to change, good or bad. And I think as soon as we can recognize that, and like for me, it's like, okay, I'm supposed to be feeling this way. I don't feel good. I feel uncomfortable, but this is how it's supposed to be. I have to get through this to get to the other side.
So, practically speaking, what are ways that we can increase the investment of our time so that we can increase the return of our time?
Well, I love, just getting creative and multitasking. I mean, I gave the example earlier of how I feel better about spending an hour watching reality TV that makes me feel like I'm getting something out of it. When you're exercising, James Robert, I know when you go running in the morning, you're listening to a podcast or
And you're
you're
getting
listening to,
text, and you're getting text
yeah, I'm
from me.
getting texts in real time. I know exactly when you're running because I'll get a text update of this is what I just learned. And so you're you're able to do those things, together in tandem where you may not have time to just sit um, and listen to a podcast and do nothing. I know for me, that's my Saturday morning.
Mm.
And I sent you that podcast the other day that I listened to, and I cleaned my whole house to it. And it was like, I got so much energy because I was able to, I'm learning something. I'm also getting stuff done around my house. So I think a lot of it's getting creative and also gaining confidence. And this is where it comes like in your team or in your organization, is having the confidence to speak up and say, this may not be a good use of my time.
Yeah.
This meeting that we're having, do I need to be in this meeting? Can this be an email? It's feeling comfortable to speak up, and you and I have been able to do that. Just the other day, we were trying to get something done, and we were like weighing the cost. Okay, we could outsource it, and it'll cost this much, and maybe take this much time,
Mm.
or we could do it internally and probably get it done in a quarter of the time. And so I think having those conversations and assessing where you're spending your time.
What about, I think, an unseen element here, and I know that we recently touched on this, talking about four distinct days or ways to block time
Mhm.
are important. Time blocking,
Yeah,
switching cost. What do we need to be
that's a
mindful
big
of
one.
there?
Yeah, I think time blocking, it's really efficient. Just being okay and saying this hour or this afternoon or this day, I'm just going to focus on this and nothing else. There is a major switching cost that I don't think we really understand. And I mean, even still, like I have to constantly remember if I stop, every time I stop to do something else, and I will say that is probably my something that I've had to work on is I try to multitask because for me, like everything's a priority. And so I'm constantly trying to get things done and I shift from one thing to the other. But every time you do that, it's the mental load that it takes to shift from one thing to the other, you're going to lose time. Then you're not going to be performing as well because you're having to shift gears really quickly.
And
So I think,
but I want to pause you for a minute because you just mentioned multitasking before, and I think there's a clear delineation and a distinction here. What you were referencing
oh,
with your experience of watching a show with your daughter and
yeah,
then facilitating a conversation, I don't see that as multitasking, or for me, running and listening to a podcast. That's not
that's true.
multitasking.
What would you call that?
Time hacking, maybe.
Time hacking. Okay.
Because we're getting a multiplier of time. We're increasing the return on time for a said activity. I'm taking
True.
care of my body on the run, but I'm also feeding my mind as well and continuously learning there.
I like
You're
that.
you're pouring into your daughter, investing into her and your relationship through the dialogue and the discussion that comes from what you're watching. So it's no longer just you're just not consuming, but then you're facilitating and discussing. So
Yeah.
you're time hacking on that. Because to your point on the switching cost, there's some really compelling research of how much switching costs are actually costing us.
Yeah. There's an analogy real quick before you give the data that I loved. I think it was Donald Miller maybe that he used switching costs, the analogy of getting on and off the freeway.
Mm.
That every time you get over, if you think about that, switching, cutting over the lanes, getting on the feeder road, and then getting back on, that's your switching costs.
Coming to the research here, it takes over 20 minutes to
Yeah.
get back on track after a task is interrupted.
Yep.
And according to psychologist David Meyer, shifting between tasks can cost us up to 40% of our productive time. Now, if you come back, think about that. When we think about switching cost, and it can take over 20 minutes to get back on track once a task is interrupted, how much time are we losing during the day as an individual, as a team, as an organization because of systems and processes that no longer serve us? And this comes back to the four different types of days or time blocks that we were talking about in our previous conversation. This is where things like race days and pace
Hmm.
days, we get on the same page, we speak a common language, and we limit the interruptions that would pull us off track, that would pull us off focus. We have a higher propensity to get into a deeper level of flow state.
Right. And this is where batching comes in too.
True,
We
very.
do a lot of batching with our work. Well, we'll put all our meetings back to back to back on one day,
Mhm.
um, versus sporadically here and there because we know the switching costs. So if there's something, and for me, when I was cranking out content, batched it all, and just spent one, day portion of the day just doing the repeated content pieces
Yep.
that would last me for the next 2-3 weeks.
Well, case in point, even these podcast conversations, we batch a 3 hour block of time
Yep.
to because this is our sole focus. And I think this is a great example of an exponential return on time because these 30-40 minute discussions then yield different types, different pieces of content that we are
Yes.
able to share to help others, to guide others, regardless of if we work with them or not. And we have seen, you know, 3-minute video clips on LinkedIn get 20, 25 hours of view time.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
much time was invested, if you will, to, well, not 25 hours. That's a 10x. I got to reframe my thinking on this, and I can't do the math right now. But that is a exponential multiplier of taking a 30, 40-minute conversation, so maybe an hour of our time for the discussion. That's a great way to say it. Let's just say it's an hour of our time here. You've now elevated the production to our team internally. Let's just say there's an hour or two there. So there's 3 hours of time that goes into one of these podcasts. But then that little 3-minute video clip gets, make math easy, 20 hours of
Yeah.
view time, 3 hours of total time to get 20 hours of view time. Well, it's a 6x multiplier, more than a 6x multiplier, almost a 7x multiplier of time right there.
Yeah.
And that's just for one small clip, which can then be extrapolated over and over and over again. And it's just
Yeah.
a different way of thinking.